The fork was already halfway to Seung Ho Lee's mouth when Maya Johnson realized the celebration was actually an execution. She knew that in this room, touching a mafia boss was a death sentence. But she also knew that if he took that bite, he wouldn't live to see the desert. With his broad, tattooed neck tensing as he prepared to swallow the toxin, Maya did the one thing no one in the criminal underworld is ever allowed to do. She lunged for his plate. Inside the velvet-lined walls of the restaurant, the atmosphere was perfectly poised. Crystal clinked, and a multi-billion-dollar business deal was being toasted with smiles and expensive wine. At the center sat Seung Ho Lee, a man whose sharp jawline and commanding presence usually kept death at bay. Surrounding him were his brothers, Hwan, Chang Min, and Seung Hoon, men whose tailored suits and warm, inviting smiles hid a cold, calculated betrayal. The dish before Seung Ho was flawless, but Maya saw the subtle green vapor rising from the garnish, a detail the boss's own security had overlooked. As the three friends watched with predatory amusement, Maya faced an impossible choice: remain an invisible servant and watch a man die, or break protocol and risk a bullet. In one shocking, defiant motion, she shattered the formal silence. Everything changed in that single heartbeat. Maya didn't just save a life. She stripped the masks off the traitors and became the only person in the room Seung Ho Lee could truly trust. Maya is no longer just a waitress. She's the eyes of the Lee Syndicate. Do you want to see the first assignment? Hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next part of Maya's journey from the restaurant floor to the heart of the mafia. Now let's continue with the story. In the velvet-hushed atmosphere of the restaurant, Maya Johnson moved like a phantom, a graceful shadow in a crisp white shirt and black apron. At 29, she had mastered the art of being entirely present yet completely invisible. To the men who frequented this VIP floor, men with broad physiques and tailored black suits, she was less a human being and more a functional piece of the high-end furniture. She poured wine without a clink, cleared plates without a sound, and kept her large, expressive eyes directed toward the floor unless summoned. It was a skill born of necessity, a quiet armor she wore to navigate a world that didn't like to be looked at too closely. But beneath that professional exterior, Maya's mind was a high-resolution camera, constantly scanning for the subtle shifts that others ignored. She noticed the way a guest's hand would tremor before a difficult negotiation, or how the scent of expensive cigars would linger in the air long after a room was emptied. While the security teams focused on the doors and the holsters, Maya focused on the human details, the forced laughter, the eyes that didn't match the smiles, and the minute errors in protocol. She was the silent watcher in a room full of lions, and it was this hyper-awareness that made her feel safe, even as she stood inches away from the city's most dangerous men. Tonight, the air felt different. As she prepared the table for Seung Ho Lee, she felt a familiar prickle at the back of her neck. Seung Ho was a man of immense power, his sharp jawline and the tattoos peeking from his collar marking him as a figure who commanded both respect and fear. He was a constant in the restaurant, usually surrounded by a wall of silence, but tonight he was accompanied by his three closest allies, Hwan, Chang Min, and Seung Hoon. They were all dressed in immaculate black suits, looking like a united front of brotherhood. To any other observer, it was just another celebration, another multi-billion-dollar business deal about to be sealed with a toast. Maya stood near the periphery, her posture graceful and her expression neutral, but her gaze was locked onto the small, seemingly insignificant details. She saw Hwan check his gold watch with a frequency that suggested he wasn't tracking time, but a countdown. She noted the way Seung Hoon maintained a warm, inviting smile that didn't quite reach his almond-shaped eyes, creating an eerie mask of friendship. Even Chang Min Park, the most solid and muscular of the trio, seemed unusually cool, his broad face reflecting a calculating stillness that felt like a coiled spring. The restaurant was a symphony of crystal glasses and soft, floating music, a carefully constructed illusion of peace. But Maya saw the cracks in the performance. She saw the way the three friends exchanged glances when Seung Ho wasn't looking, a silent communication that spoke of a plan already in motion. She was used to being the invisible girl, the one who saw the truth while the powerful played their games, but tonight, her invisibility felt like a burden. For the first time, Being the watcher wasn't just about her survival. It was about recognizing the invisible thread of betrayal winding its way toward the center of the table. The heavy glass doors of the restaurant swung open, and the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly, the air growing thick with the weight of arrival. Seung Ho Lee entered first, his muscular, broad physique commanding the space as if he owned the very foundations of the building. He walked with a calm, predatory grace, his sharp jawline set in a mask of stoic authority. Behind him, moving in a synchronized formation of dark wool and silk, were Hwan Kwon, Chang Min Park, and Seung Hoon. To any casual observer, they were a brotherhood of titans, 4 men who had bled together to build an empire, now coming to enjoy the fruits of their labor. Maya moved to the edge of the VIP section, her steps light and practiced, her expression a perfect mirror of professional neutrality. She watched as the men took their seats at the center table, the literal heart of the room. Seung Ho sat at the head, his back to the wall, his tattooed neck visible above the crisp white collar of his shirt. He looked imposing, a king among his generals, yet Maya noticed a rare looseness in his shoulders, a sign of trust that felt dangerously misplaced. "To the future," Hwan Kwon announced, his voice smooth and resonant as he signaled for the first bottle. He was the most polished of the trio, his clean-shaven face radiating a deceptive warmth as he caught Seung Ho's eye. Maya stepped forward to pour the wine, her hands steady even as she felt the prickle of unease intensified. As the dark liquid filled the glasses, she saw Chang Min Park adjusting his sleeve, his solid, muscular frame tense despite the celebratory nature of the evening. His calculating eyes darted toward the kitchen doors, and then back to Seung Ho, a hunter gauging the distance to his prey. The business deal toast began, a theatrical display of loyalty and shared ambition. Seung Hoon raised his glass, his almond-shaped eyes crinkling with that inviting, eerie smile. He spoke of expansion, of billions in new revenue, and of the unbreakable bond between the 4 of them. The words were perfect, but as Maya retreated to the shadows of the service station, she saw the reality behind the performance. From her vantage point, the table transformed into a Judas table. She watched the 3 friends exchange a glance, a rapid, microscopic confirmation that bypassed the boss entirely. They weren't celebrating a deal, they were officiating a funeral. Seung Ho Lee laughed, a deep, rare sound of genuine contentment, and raised his glass to meet theirs. The crystal clinked with a sound like a tolling bell, clear and final. Maya's large, expressive eyes remained fixed on the plates about to emerge from the kitchen, her heart hammering against her ribs as she realized the mask of brotherhood was about to fall, and the only person who could see the blade was the girl they had spent all night ignoring. The kitchen doors swung open, and the scent of seared wagyu and expensive spices wafted into the dining room. But for Maya, the aroma was masked by the sudden, heavy scent of a trap. She moved with her usual silent grace as the junior servers brought out the primary courses, but her eyes remained locked on the periphery of the table where the true power dynamics were shifting. While Seung Ho Lee sat back, listening to Seung Hoon use charming anecdotes about their recent acquisitions, the atmosphere around the plates became a battlefield of subtle movements that only a professional watcher could detect. Maya noticed Chang Min Park, the most solidly built and physically imposing of the trio, suddenly shift in his seat. He didn't reach for his glass. Instead, he leaned back and began a loud, booming conversation with the 2 primary security guards stationed at the entrance of the VIP alcove. It was an uncharacteristic move for the calculating man, his voice rising just enough to draw their eyes away from the table and toward him as he joked about a shared acquaintance from their old neighborhood. His broad shoulders blocked their line of sight, creating a momentary, artificial blind spot that cloaked the rest of the table. In that manufactured window of distraction, Maya's gaze flickered to the plates. She was positioned near the service station, close enough to catch the steam rising from the boss's steak. Her heart skipped a beat as she saw the head chef, a man who usually moved with the precision of a surgeon, fumble slightly as he placed a sprig of garnish on Seung Ho's plate. But it wasn't the chef's nerves that stopped her breath. It was the smell. Beneath the rich, savory aroma of the wine reduction, there was a sharp, bitter tang that didn't belong. It was a scent that hit the back of her throat like a warning, a faint, almond-like bitterness that she recognized from her years of working in high-pressure environments where the smell of cleaning chemicals and industrial agents was common. It was the unmistakable metallic edge of cyanide. She looked at Hwan, the most polished and charismatic of the friends, and saw him subtly nudging the plate closer to Seung Hoon with the tip of his finger, his eyes never leaving the boss's face. The security guards were still laughing at Chang Min's story, their professional vigilance completely compromised by a brother's camaraderie. The trap was perfectly set. The distraction was flawless. Seung Hoon, feeling safe in the presence of his oldest friends, picked up his silver fork and knife. Maya stood frozen for a fraction of a second, the standard black and white of her uniform feeling like a heavy weight. She knew that the something shocking was no longer a choice. It was an inevitability. If she remained the invisible girl for one more minute, the man at the head of the table would be a corpse before he reached the final course. The dining room felt as though the oxygen had been sucked out of it, leaving a pressurized vacuum where every small sound was amplified into a thunderclap. Seung Hoon, the man whose sharp jawline and muscular build usually radiated a sense of absolute dominance, looked almost vulnerable as he cut a small piece of the steak. He was relaxed, his guard lowered by the decades of history he shared with the men at his table. He didn't see the way the light glinted off the silverware like a polished blade, nor did he notice the chilling change in the air as his three brothers fell into a predatory silence. Maya's eyes, wide and filled with an intense worry, were locked on Seung Hoon. He was the youngest, the one with the defined athletic build and the hair combed back in a stylish, dark wave. He had always been the one with the inviting smile, the face that the organization used to put business partners at ease. But now, as the silver fork hovered inches from Seung Ho's mouth, that smile morphed into something truly eerie. It stayed warm and soft on his lips, but his almond-shaped eyes were as cold and stagnant as a frozen lake. He wasn't just watching a meal, he was watching a clock run out. Seung Hoon's expression carried a smug, entertained quality that made Maya's skin crawl. He looked like a man watching the final scene of a movie he had already seen, savoring the moment the hero finally walks into the trap. Beside him, Hwan and Chang Min Park maintained their own masks of cool, collected detachment, their immaculate black suits reflecting no trace of the blood that was about to be on their hands. They were all smiling, subtle, dark, and knowing, creating a circle of treachery that Seung Ho was blindly leaning into. Maya could see the muscles in the boss's tattooed neck move as he spoke one last word of praise for the meal, his broad shoulders shifting with a deep breath that brought the poisoned scent of cyanide deep into his lungs. The smiling assassins didn't blink. They didn't breathe. They just waited for the Judas kiss to take effect, their eyes reflecting the candlelight and the absolute lack of empathy for the man they were about to destroy. Maya realized that the time for observation had ended. The fork was halfway to his mouth, and the eerie, joyful anticipation on Seung Hoon's face was the final confirmation she needed. The invisible girl was the only thing standing between a powerful man and the cold, smiling death seated right across from him. The silver tines of the fork were inches from Seung Ho's lips, the steam of the poisoned steak curling around his sharp jawline like a beckoning ghost. Time seemed to liquefy, slowing until Maya could hear the erratic thrumming of her own heart against her ribs. She looked at the three friends, Hwan, Chang Min, and Seung Hoon, and saw the smiling assassins leaning forward with a predatory, eerie stillness. Their immaculate black suits and polished expressions were a fortress of deception, and the boss, lulled by 20 years of shared history, was walking straight into the abyss. Maya didn't think. She simply moved. Her slim, graceful frame blurred across the VIP floor, cutting through the heavy, pressurized silence of the room like a blade. In a single, shocking motion that defied every rule of the establishment and every law of the underworld, she reached out and clamped her hand firmly around Seung Ho's muscular wrist. The clatter of the fork hitting the fine china plate was as loud as a gunshot in the hushed restaurant. Seung Ho froze, his commanding presence suddenly replaced by a flash of raw, confused anger as he looked up at the waitress who had dared to touch him. The room went icy. The security guards reached for their holsters, their broad physiques tensing as they prepared to neutralize the threat. But the most dramatic transformation happened across the table. The smirks that had been playing on the lips of the three friends didn't just fade, they curdled into a dark, visceral rage. The mask of the international global elite slipped, revealing the jagged edges of the traitors beneath. Hwan Kwon's clean-shaven face twisted into a mask of fury, his intense eyes flashing with the realization that their perfect plan had been derailed by the one person they considered beneath their notice. "What is the meaning of this?" Seung Hoon hissed, his warm, inviting smile replaced by a chilling snarl. He stood halfway out of his chair, his athletic build coiled like a snake ready to strike. "You dare lay hands on the chairman? Get your filthy hands off him before I have them removed." Maya didn't let go. Her large, expressive eyes remained locked on Seung Ho Lee's face, conveying a desperate, heroic determination that bypassed the screaming men around her. She could feel the power in the boss's arm, the tattoos on his neck pulsing with his rising blood pressure. She was the watcher no longer. She was the disruptor. In that moment of breathless defiance, Maya Johnson stood alone against the three most powerful men in the room, her standard black and white uniform a badge of truth in a den of immaculate liars. The dining room fell into a silence so absolute it felt like the world had stopped breathing. Seung Ho Lee sat frozen, his hand still clamped by Maya's fingers, but the confusion in his eyes was rapidly being replaced by a terrifying, visceral distress. A sudden, jagged spasm racked his muscular frame, and he released the fork entirely, his hand flying to his own throat as he began to choke. His sharp jawline tightened, and his eyes bulged with the effort to draw air, his broad chest heaving as the fast-acting toxin began its work. Maya did not flinch, even as she felt the immense power in his arm tremble with agony. She held her ground, her large, expressive eyes wide with a mixture of terror and fierce determination, looking directly into the face of a man who could have her ended with a whisper. Around them, the atmosphere turned lethal. The security guards, seeing their boss in physical pain and a waitress touching him, drew their weapons in a blur of motion, the cold steel of their handguns catching the flickering candlelight. "Kill her!" Hwan Kwon roared, his previous mask of polished charisma completely shattered. He slammed his palms onto the table, his lean, well-toned body trembling with a dark, frantic rage. "She has assaulted the chairman. She has poisoned him. Execute her where she stands." The other two friends were just as quick to call for blood. Chang Min Park stood up, his massive, muscular build looming over the table like a mountain of granite, his dark eyes reflecting a calculating malice as he pointed a trembling finger at Maya. "She's a plant, an assassin," he bellowed, his voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers. "Don't let her speak. End this now." Seung Hoon, the snake of the group, didn't shout, but his voice was even more terrifying. His warm, inviting smile had vanished, replaced by a cold, smug sneer as he watched Seung Ho struggle for air. "The disrespect is unforgivable," he hissed, his almond-shaped eyes fixed on Maya with a promise of slow, agonizing retribution. "A waitress touching a king? It's an insult that can only be washed away in red." Seung Ho Lee, his face darkening as he fought the constriction in his throat, looked up at Maya through the haze of his pain. He saw the standard black and white of her uniform, the neatness of her apron, and the sheer, raw empathy written across her face. He saw the three men he called brothers, men who were screaming for her death instead of reaching for a doctor, and in that breathless silence, the first seeds of a terrible realization began to take root in his mind. Maya leaned in closer, her voice a steady, urgent anchor in the storm of the friends' demands for her execution. She wasn't just holding his wrist anymore, she was holding his life. The chaos of the room swirled around them like a violent storm, but Maya remained the motionless center of the eye. Seung Ho Lee's grip on his own throat tightened, his muscular frame shuddering as the first wave of the toxin clawed at his insides. The security guards, paralyzed by the conflicting sight of their gasping leader and the frantic shouting of his inner circle, kept their weapons leveled at Maya's chest. The air was thick with the metallic scent of drawn steel and the bitter, lingering tang of the steak. "He's dying because of her," Hwan Kwon screamed, his polished, clean-shaven face contorting into a mask of righteous fury. "Why is she still breathing? Kill her and get the chairman to a doctor. Maya ignored the barrel of the gun inches from her face. She looked down at Seung Ho, whose sharp jawline was slick with a cold sweat, and then she turned her large, expressive eyes toward Jai Hwan. The fear that had anchored her all evening had finally burned away, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. She realized that if she died now, the truth died with her. "If I poisoned him," Maya's voice rang out, steady and resonant, cutting through the frantic demands for her execution, "then the rest of the food is safe. Isn't that right, Mr. Hwan?" Jai Hwan blinked, his intense eyes flickering with a momentary hesitation. "What are you talking about, girl? Look at him." "You were so eager for him to eat," Maya said, her gaze shifting to the plate that sat undisturbed in front of Jai Hwan. "You toasted to his health. You spoke of brotherhood." With a sudden, forceful movement, she reached across the table. Her slim hand, still steady despite the guns pointed at her, grabbed the edge of Jai Hwan's immaculate white plate and slid it toward the gasping boss. In the same motion, she shoved Seung Ho's tainted meal directly under Jai Hwan's nose. The clatter of the plates sliding across the marble tabletop sounded like the racking of a bolt. The evidence in the glass wasn't just in the wine. It was in the absolute terror that suddenly drained the color from Jai Hwan's face. "Since you are so concerned about the chairman's appetite," Maya challenged, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "why don't you finish his meal for him? It's a celebratory night, isn't it?" Jai Hwan recoiled as if the steak were a coiled viper. His lean, well-toned body pressed back against his chair, his hands coming up to shield himself from the very dish he had just been encouraging his brother to consume. The smirks on the faces of Chang Min Park and Seung Hoon vanished instantly, replaced by a haunting, breathless silence. The security guards paused. They were trained to spot an assassin, but they were also trained to recognize the scent of guilt. They watched as Jai Hwan, the man who had been screaming for an execution, now looked like a man facing his own. Seung Ho Lee, his breathing shallow and ragged, turned his head slowly. He looked at the plate in front of his oldest friend, and then he looked at the sheer, paralyzed cowardice in Jai Hwan's eyes. The Judas reveal was no longer a suspicion. It was an undeniable, physical truth sitting on the table between them. The silence that followed Maya's challenge was more deafening than the previous roar of accusations. Jai Hwan stared at the plate of poisoned steak as if it were a ticking bomb, his face turning a sickly shade of gray that clashed with his immaculate navy silk suit. The polished, clean-shaven mask he had worn all evening didn't just slip. It disintegrated, revealing a hollow, desperate man beneath the charisma. Across the table, the athletic Seung Hoon and the muscular Chang Min Park looked at one another, the realization dawning that their perfect plan had been dismantled by the very person they had deemed invisible. "Eat it, Jai Hwan," Seung Ho Lee rasped, his voice sounding like grinding stones as he fought through the constriction in his throat. He leaned forward, his broad, tattooed chest heaving, his eyes burning with a cold, lethal clarity that terrified the men who had just toasted to his health. The cool and collected demeanor of the three friends vanished in an instant, replaced by the frantic energy of cornered animals. Jai Hwan didn't reach for the fork. Instead, his hand blurred toward the waistband of his trousers. But he was too slow. The security guards, finally seeing the truth in his hesitation, shifted their aim from Maya to the inner circle. "It wasn't just me," Jai Hwan screamed, his voice cracking with a high-pitched desperation as he realized the game was up. He lunged toward Chang Min Park, perhaps seeking cover or a scapegoat, but the massive man shoved him aside with a snarl of desperate violence. The table erupted into a chaotic collision of fine china and splintering wood. Seung Hoon, the snake with the eerie smile, abandoned all pretense of elegance, flipping the heavy marble table to create a barricade as he reached for a concealed weapon. Maya was thrown backward by the force of the table's collapse, but she didn't stop watching. She saw the three men who had called themselves brothers turn on each other in a heartbeat, their loyalty proving as thin as the steam rising from the poison. They were no longer elite generals of a criminal empire. They were cowards tripping over their own tailored hemlines to escape the shadow of the man they had failed to kill. Amidst the flying glass and the shouts of the guards, Seung Lee stood tall, his muscular frame trembling not from the toxin, but from a towering, silent rage. He ignored the bullets that began to fly from the friend's desperate retreat, his gaze fixed solely on the three traitors who had traded his life for a business deal. The masks were gone, the celebration was dead, and as the restaurant transformed into a war zone, the only person left standing with any shred of honor was the waitress in the stained black and white uniform who had dared to see what no one else would. The echoes of gunfire and shattered crystal finally faded, replaced by the heavy, rhythmic breathing of a man who had stared into the abyss and climbed back out. The VIP floor was a ruin of its former elegance. The three brothers, Hwan, Chang Min, and Seung Hoon, had been dragged away by the security team, their frantic pleas for mercy falling on deaf ears. Seung Lee stood amidst the wreckage, his muscular frame steadying as his body fought off the last remnants of the toxin. He adjusted his black tie with a trembling hand, his sharp jawline tight with the weight of a betrayal that had cost him his past, but not his life. Maya stood near the service station, her standard black and white uniform stained with wine and dust, her voluminous curly hair slightly disheveled from the chaos. She felt the sudden, crushing weight of her invisibility returning, the adrenaline that had fueled her defiance now ebbing away into a cold, hollow exhaustion. She expected to be dismissed, or perhaps questioned by the police, but she didn't expect the boss to turn his gaze toward her with such singular, piercing intensity. Seung Lee walked toward her, his heavy steps crunching over the fragments of the Judas table. The guards moved to intercept him, but he waved them back with a sharp, dismissive gesture. He stopped just inches away from Maya, his presence as commanding as ever, though his eyes now held a flicker of something she hadn't seen before, genuine, raw respect. "Everyone in this room was paid to protect me," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that vibrated in the quiet air. "My friends were paid in loyalty and blood. My guards were paid in gold, yet they all looked away." He looked down at her hands, the hands that had dared to grab his wrist and defy a king. "You were the only one who saw the truth, and you were the only one who risked everything to act on it." Maya swallowed hard, her large, expressive eyes searching his face. "I just did what was right, sir," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What is right is a luxury few in my world can afford," Seung Ho replied, a grim smile touching his lips. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a heavy, gold-embossed card, pressing it into her palm. "You have a gift, Maya Johnson. You see what others miss because they think you are beneath them. That kind of vision is more valuable to me than 1,000 soldiers." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a tone of absolute gravity. "The restaurant is no longer a safe place for you, but my organization has a vacancy for someone who can spot a lie before it's spoken. I am offering you a position at my right hand, not as a servant, but as my eyes." Maya looked at the card, then back at the man who had been a stranger moments ago. She had never asked for power, and the world of the Korean Mafia was one she had only ever observed from the shadows. But as she looked at Seung Lee, she realized that her invisibility was truly gone. He had recognized her bravery, and in doing so, he had placed a life debt between them that could never be repaid with mere tips or thank yous. The Watcher had finally been seen, and the path ahead was no longer a quiet shadow, but a journey into the very heart of the light. Maya risked her life to save a man most people would fear. If you were in Maya's shoes, would you have stayed silent to stay safe, or would you have risked it all to do what's right? Let me know in the comments. I'm reading every single one. Thank you for watching.